Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Suzanne Aisha Stone, and I am the Executive Director of the International Wildlife Coexistence Network. We are a team of people from all kinds of disciplines across the board, from scientists, biologists, ecologists, tribal leaders, uh, wildlife managers, teachers. We're all coming together to help protect the remaining wildlife on the planet and to search for new ways to coexist with them. You know, we're living in a time when the Earth is losing her wildlife and wild places faster than any time in the last 3 million years, faster than it's ever been since humans have been on the planet. And if we maintain this path, wild species and their unique habitats will be lost forever. Currently, wildlife in conflict with people are often killed because either the communities don't know a different way or they've always done it the same way. And at a point in our history, we really humanity looked at wildlife as being such a free resource, one that would be never deplenished and always available. And what we're seeing now on the planet is that was the wrong perception, that we definitely have a finite number of wildlife and wild places, and we're having a heavier and heavier impact on them. We think about the word coexistence, and I just posed this to a group of sixth graders this week from Hawthorne Elementary, and I asked them, you know, what does coexistence mean to you? And they had some great answers across the board: living in peace with each other, being able to respect the other, even if the other is four-legged, to exist together at the same time, the same place, and then proactively to work with nature instead of against her. And that's really, you know, the foreground for the International Wildlife Coexistence Network. Our main focus is how do we learn how to live with wildlife in a peaceful way without being in either high competition or in the process of eradication. How do we work with nature instead of against her? So it is my great pleasure tonight to introduce a lot of our terrific panelists. We're excited about you guys joining us here. And I would like to start off by introducing James Holt. He's a Nez Perce member and executive director of the Buffalo Field Campaign. James has a BS in environmental science from the University of Idaho, and he served 2 terms on the Nez Perce Tribes Wildlife Commission and 1 term on the Nez Perce Tribal Executive Committee, the tribe's governing body. He's a respected leader in the wildlife community among both tribal and environmental organizations. We're very happy to have him here tonight, along with Dr. Robert Crabtree, who's the chief scientist at the Yellowstone Ecological Research Center. Dr. Crabtree is co-founder and chief scientist, as well as, which is a nonprofit organization, and is best known for his long-term collaborative research at large spatial scales to increase the role of science in at the decision-making table. He's best known for his long-term research and monitoring in Yellowstone National Park since 1988, and helping to understand and help us all understand the trophic response of when wolves are restored and fire is restored into the ecosystem. He now specializes in ecological forecasting models and related technologies like remote sensing, which is an exciting new field that provides trusted information in a timely manner to make sustainable decisions on the landscape. Sorry. Then I'd like to turn to Dr. Nathan Barley. He is the co-owner of the Yellowstone Wolf Tracker, along with his lovely wife, Linda. Nathan Barley grew up in Yellowstone National Park in the tiny community of Mammoth Hot Springs. His parents have been biologists and park rangers that lived and worked in the park for 3 decades. Following in his family's footsteps, Nathan studied biology at Montana State University, where he earned his BS and then MS degrees. His research at the University of Alberta focused on the relationship between wolves and elk after the wolf reintroduction. And his wife, Linda Thurston, they co-own this wildlife touring business, The Wild Side. LLC, which specializes in outfitting groups to view wolves, other wildlife, and all that the Yellowstone ecosystem has to offer. Michelle Lau, turning to our next panelist, is a junior at Timberline High School here in Boise. Michelle is the vice president of THS's Environmental Club and leads their wolf initiative. He hopes to combine mathematics with wildlife and wolf advocacy to create a compelling story for wolf conservation. And we welcome him. And then last but certainly not least is Talesie Brooks. She's a staff attorney with Western Watersheds Project, where her work largely focuses on fighting public lands livestock raising. She got involved with wolf issues after she successfully represented conservation organizations in litigation challenging the USDA Wildlife Service's wolf killing actions in Idaho, and learned how much politics, not science, drives wolf management here. Tallassy is the section chair of the Environment and Natural Resources section of the Idaho State Bar. She's an advisory board member for the Public Land and Natural Resources Law Review, a board member of Wilderness Watch, and volunteers on trail maintenance and construction projects in Boise in her spare time, which I think she very seldom has. So with that, I would like to invite James Holt to take us forward, and then we're going to go through small presentations for all of you, focusing on what's occurring in the Northern Rockies to the wolves here, and then we will come back and do a question and answer. So if you have a question while someone is speaking, please make sure you put it into the questions Q&A section down below on your screen. Thank you. And with that, James, please take the stand.
Thank you, Suzanne. I appreciate everybody being on this call tonight to discuss this important issue. As you may know, the Nez Perce tribe was one of the first, if not the first, tribe to embark on a reintroduction effort for an endangered species at the state level. This was built upon Tumulwit, our sacred relationship with all living things that we have in our homelands. This sacred relationship spans since time immemorial. Many of our cultural lifeways and the runnings of our society is based upon the ways of the wolf. Often when the wolf would howl and lead his pack, we would hunt in that direction. Wolf had a very practical and important way and an influence over our lifeways. And so we used him for our own subsistence, our own cultural and spiritual traditions. And so it was important for us to step forward. My uncle before me, back in the mid-90s, using his voice to stand for wolves, to discuss the importance of their reintroduction, their absence from the land, the homelands that we have, ailing species that were hurting because the wolf was missing. And so now we can see that again with the rise of these different diseases and sicknesses. It was in that type of a mentality that the tribe stepped forward. We knew that we had the technical and scientific capacity to manage wolves, to lead the reintroduction effort. We signed an agreement with the federal government in 1855. In that treaty, we retained rights to secure a way of life. That right was to hunt and to fish, to gather. Through case law, those treaty reserved rights are known to not mean much if there's no treaty resources. And so the tribe, in its capacity, has asserted that importance. They've led the recovery efforts. They've engaged with the federal government time and time again in good faith. Always we see the resources pay the price of development. We see the forest diminish. We see the onset of climate change, extreme weather events. Again, we have chronic wasting disease and other sicknesses. And then the wolf can help us with this. Humans cannot seek or hope to supplant the role of wolves in the natural world. And so the tribes have initiated numerous consultations with the federal government calling for equal footing, co-management to influence the management of these critical resources and these wildlife populations so that we can all benefit, so that our children and our unborn generations will have a natural world to look forward to. And it's the presence of wolves and other apex predators, of which you will hear from, that will help make this true. And so I thank you all for your time tonight. I look forward to your questions to clarify some of these things that we will talk about, to understand that there are legal obligations that the federal government can honor, these treaties, these way of life, to help us in this world and to help our unborn generations. So I thank you for your time, and I look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, James. I should interject too that just for folks that don't know, that wolves were exterminated from the Northern Rockies by the mid-1930s. It was in 1995 and 1996 that the Clinton administration secured their reintroduction to Yellowstone and central Idaho to restore the species. Wolves were one of the first species that were listed under the new ESA, Endangered Species Act, in the 1970s. The recent federal court ruling that returned wolves to federal protection did not include the Northern Rockies, as this population was removed from federal protection in 2009. The wolf population remained stable here in the Northern Rockies, somewhat stable, until the 5-year federal oversight period ended and Idaho began very aggressively reducing protection for wolves. In 2015, Idaho estimated the wolf population at 786 wolves statewide and increased wolf killing permits to 10 wolves per person. In 2019, more than 600 wolves were killed in Idaho, and it was largely based on a new bounty system that had been put into place that was partially funded by the state. Since then, each year, more than 400 wolves have been killed, and despite the added pressure of bounties up to $2,500 per wolf, including pups, year-round and unlimited killing, the number of wolves killed is dropping. And that is where I'm going to turn and talk. Let us have Dr. Crabtree take us forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne, and thank you everyone for attending, and thank you for your wise words, James. Well, I grew up in North Idaho, like, where James lives. And I first started working in Yellowstone after the Great Fires of 1988. I built a wolf population model that accounted for social class and family structure as part of an enormous EIS process back in the early 90s. We also used science to make predictions illustrated in a figure that Allison may be able to pull up, used by thousands of teachers and students across the US. Collectively, all of our predictions basically came true. And we were right. We used science back then for wolf decision-making, and sadly, we don't do that today. And here are two examples of that. First, we need to measure wolves, and we don't do that anymore. Soon after delisting the best available scientific method to count them was abandoned by the political leaders of otherwise good fish and game agencies. The method used in Idaho, for example, is both biased and imprecise. It's like a nervous hand-shaking hunter shooting a rifle at a target with a curved barrel. Can you imagine going to court with such weak evidence, or managing your business without knowing what stock you have on the shelves of your store? And why should it be any different for our nation's imperiled wildlife? It shouldn't. Second, wolves provide many benefits to humans by keeping the ecosystems that we rely upon healthy. Apex predators like wolves have a disproportionately large influence on ecosystems. You know, with few species at naturally occurring low densities at the top of the food chain, they and ecosystem health are highly vulnerable. Thus, the most effective way to decimate an ecosystem is to kill the large carnivores, like we've done in the past. However, reintroducing them may be the most cost-effective way to restore that health and benefit humankind. That's what we did, and that's what we saw in Yellowstone with the reintroduction there. Science has given us a long list of benefits to ecosystems as well as directly to humans, such as keeping game populations healthy like deer and elk, restoring vegetation, reducing disease transmission, and a whole lot more. So there you have it. We're really flying blind as we ignore science, the facts, and common sense. We don't even know how many wolves we have in the Northern Rockies. We ignore benefits to society as well as their value to the ecosystems that sustain our lives. And what small negative impacts wolves have on domestic livestock can be reduced or even eliminated with coexistence practices that Suzanne will touch on in just a bit. So if we evaluate wolf killing based on the big 3 E yardsticks, ecology, economics, and ethics, we can't justify the choice to kill. Even if we look at each E individually, the evidence suggests the only benefit of killing is for sport killing. And I understand that because I used to. So we weigh evidence in courts and we use it to run successful businesses. And in the spirit of NEPA, we require the perpetrator to justify their actions and make the right choice. So why can't we use the best available science for wolf management decisions? Thank you.
Bob, and we're still looking for that graphic, so we'll try to find it and stick it up as soon as we can. If you find it in your file, we can show that a little bit later as well. So with that, I would like to turn to Nathan Barley from the Yellowstone Wolf Tracker.
Hello, thank you, Suzanne and everyone. I'm here to talk about the same issue, just from a slightly different perspective. I make my living as an eco-tour operator, somebody that works here in Yellowstone, where we just have the great pleasure of living and enjoying the natural setting around us. But our livelihoods are very much tied to the wolves. And Yellowstone wolves are a national treasure for that reason. People come from around the country, come from around the world to see the wolves here in the park and all the other wildlife. It's really, no question about it, with the current economic data, the very top economic driver for our region. A current estimate, actually a updated estimate that I just saw yesterday from economists looking at this fact, $82 million a year is the estimated size of our industry. So very significant, and it pours into the states of the Northern Rockies that surround Yellowstone, like Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming. So we're talking about jobs. We're talking about small businesses that are stable, year-round revenue producing streams for tax bases. All this is being jeopardized by a campaign to kill wolves. Backing up a little bit, wolf recovery in Yellowstone is a great conservation success story. Many people from around the world refer to it as, one of the greatest milestones in conservation in the last century. And here we are trying to undo all that with the current regime that the states have implemented to kill these wolves. In Yellowstone alone, this past year, we went from about 130 wolves down to about 80. 25 were reported by hunters and trappers as ones that were killed, and others presumably died or dispersed to other places. But the reflection that I see in the regulations of these states around the park is just a pure pathology towards wolves. We try to understand it as business owners, like, how can we help? Like, address your problems, but it's really not about addressing a particular problem. Livestock loss is very minimal, particularly around Yellowstone. Big game hunting is still thriving around Yellowstone. So it's all based on perception and what I would describe acutely as a misinformation. It's a misinformation campaign to go after wolves without really having a problem, a specific problem that they're trying to solve. And just purely based on very dubious ideological justifications. So we've gone to the states, we've gone to Montana in particular. I'm a resident of Montana, and said, why is this going on? Can we change this? Can we go back to at least protecting wolves around the park? I'd like to see them protected on a far wider landscape, but that's not really where we're at yet. But at least everyone can agree we don't need to kill Yellowstone Park wolves as they cross the boundary and go out of the park. They're vulnerable, no longer protected. And our pleas have largely fallen on deaf ears. We've organized as a business coalition in our area, and this is just a small gateway area in Montana to Yellowstone Park around the north entrance. Our Wild Livelihoods Business Coalition is very specifically tied to addressing this situation. We see wolves and trout and all the wildlife and wild landscapes of our area as currency, and the state should see it the same way, at least from an economic standpoint. And I would just wrap up by saying that I'm here to talk about economics. My livelihood, my wife's livelihood, all of our employees' livelihood is very much tied to this. If we don't have wolves, we're not in business anymore. But that's not the only reason I think that we should stop killing wolves. There are so many compelling reasons among all the speakers that you're hearing from tonight that I just was here to talk about my piece. I very much believe in the ecological values of wolves, the intrinsic values of wolves, and really we just need nature back in our lives, and into what's there is to protect it from onslaughts like this one. So thanks very much for your time. Happy to answer any questions when we move to the question and answer phase of that. Back to you, Suzanne.
Thank you so much, Nathan. All right, we are turning now to Timberline High School student, Michelle Lau. And Michelle, you want to take us a little bit further and talk about the Idaho wolves and your experience with them here?
Yeah, thank you, Suzanne. So I first got into, learning about wolves because of hearing about Senate Bill 1211 in Idaho in my environmental science class, which just basically allows a bunch of wolves to die. And originally I thought wolves were bad because of stories like the Little Red Riding Hood, the Wolf and the Three Little Pigs, but I soon learned that that wasn't the truth, and for all of the reasons you've heard from the earlier panelists. Eventually, I heard about how the U.S. Department of Agriculture allowed a government trapper to go into my high school's pack's den site and kill 8 of our pups. The pack had no recorded livestock kills, and they just killed the pups who never got to live or experience the world. And it was really heartbreaking to know that our federal government was condoning that. Even more so, Idaho has created bounties up to $2,500 per wolf kill, as Suzanne mentioned earlier. And so all of this really got me into wolf advocacy, especially since my school has had this pack since August 2003. I haven't personally been able to track the pack because of everything that's been going on politically and with COVID, but this is a story of the many generations of Timberline students that have passed through, and those that have gone on trips with Suzanne and Carter Niemeyer, who was a wolf expert for Wildlife Services. And so it really hurt our identity as a whole. Earlier this year, we just found out that our entire pack had died. And so now our identity of Timberline as being the Timberline Wolves is basically gone. And so history shows that individual voices often can't do much by themselves, but collective voices do. And I believe we can all put pressure for an emergency relisting to the Endangered Species Act, specifically on Secretary Deb Haaland. President Biden has been aware of this since last August. In the short video you saw earlier today, he talked about how his grandchildren ask Pop, they're gonna kill all the wolves. Why is that happening, Pop? And I know if this continues to happen, it will turn into, why did this happen? And why didn't you solve this, Pop? I want wolves in my tomorrow and in my children's tomorrow. I want to see them when I go to our national forests, and I want to hear their howls. But if this keeps happening, that won't happen. My generation is coming to vote soon, and we'll be asking ourselves if President Biden followed through on his concern with wolves. And I encourage you, when you go to vote, to think about the same things. Who is actually protecting our wildlife and our environment for my generation and the generation to follow? Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. And now we're going to turn to Talesie Brooks with Western Watersheds Project.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Suzanne. So I just want to discuss really quickly what's going on with the wolves. Where are we at? So after S 1211 passed the law in Idaho that significantly liberalized wolf killing regulations, and similar laws also passed in Montana last year, two separate petitions were submitted, one led by my organization, Western Watersheds Project, to list the wolf as an endangered species under the Endangered Species Act, and specifically to list wolves in the Northern Rockies and the Western United States under the Endangered Species Act. And the Fish and Wildlife Service last year issued a finding that the petitions presented substantial information showing that listing of wolves may be warranted. And that sparked a status review, which is currently ongoing. And so what you can do as members of the public right now is, if you have scientific information or other concrete information about wolf numbers, wolf management, that type of thing, you can submit it for the Fish and Wildlife Service to consider during the status review. And you can do that by submitting it through a website called regulations.gov. It's very easy, and that gives you an opportunity to be heard in this process. And the other thing you can do is you can call Secretary Holland and President Biden tomorrow and let them know that you support wolves and want to see them relisted in Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming. And then finally, I just want to talk about what happens when this status review concludes. So the status review will end. It's supposed to be within 12 months from the first listing petition received. The Fish and Wildlife Service has said that it will conclude the status review in late September of this year. And at that point, it will issue finding either that wolves are warranted for protection under the ESA, the Endangered Species Act, that they are warranted but precluded by higher priority species for listing, or that they are not warranted for listing. And in the event that they decide to list the species as warranted or warranted but precluded, they'll issue a proposed rule, and there will be an opportunity for public comment. And that, if there is a proposed rule, that is where your voices will really need to be heard, because the Fish and Wildlife Service will need to hear an outpouring of support for wolves and hear from the public at large how important these special animals are to us. And so we will be reaching out when that finding comes out one way or another. And in the meantime, I hope that all of you feel empowered now to lift your voices tomorrow and call out to our elected officials and ask them to relist wolves now.
Talesie, thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen here because there's a few things that we wanted to present, and let's see here if I can do it without messing up the entire thing. And it's always one bar or the other that gets in your way. Let's see, from the current slide. There we go. So in Idaho, I've been working here for a little over 3 decades. We didn't have wolves here when I started in the 1980s. It is only because of really the federal government stepping in and taking action to restore wolves when they did wolves into Yellowstone National Park. So about half the wolves came to Idaho, central Idaho, and the other half to Yellowstone. There were also wolves on the ground in northwestern Montana. So the plan was that there would be 3 subpopulations of wolves that were connected together as a metapopulation. That was the goal. And today we know that those populations are becoming more and more isolated. The entire Northern Rockies region includes Eastern Oregon and Eastern Washington as well. And those areas, wolves are not protected at this point, at least under state law in Oregon. And we're part of the delisting of the Northern Rockies wolves. So they don't have the new protections that were afforded by the judge who reversed the Trump era relisting rule for wolves nationwide. It's really kind of complicated stuff. But if you want to learn more about it, we have a lot of information on our website at relistwolvesnow.org. You're welcome to take a look there. And we'll also provide more information as we're going tonight. I did want to share with you some quotes. If you talk to the animals, they will talk with you and you will know each other. And if you do not talk to them, you will not know them. And what you do not know, you will fear. What one fears, one destroys. And I think that's really the essence of what we're seeing happening in states like Idaho, where all of this fear mongering is going on. And we've lost the sense of real wolves, that it's all about this imaginary wolf that somehow is breaking up the threat as far as elk and deer numbers or livestock. And as Bob mentioned earlier, our livestock losses are under 1% of available livestock in the state. The narrative, though, that cuts out to the paper and is often in the headlines is much stronger. And it's scary stuff. It kind of boils back to that same old, big bad wolf stuff. And unfortunately, it really portrays the wolf in a way that the public gets very confused about. Why would you want to restore an animal that is so scary? But they don't, they're not able to put it into context because a lot of the reporting that goes on is not put into context either. And that's unfortunate. We really need to change the narrative on wolves so people know why they're so valuable and why we need them as part of a healthy ecosystem. Some of us have talked about bounties tonight. We've had pushback from even the Fish and Wildlife Service saying you really can't call it a bounty. This is the poster that the group that pays the bounties has put out, and they've paid now for well over 1,000 wolves to be killed, including pups in the den. So pups that haven't even made it out of the den site yet can fetch a bounty for whatever the going rate is. Last year was up to $2,500 per wolf. So it's clearly a bounty. I don't care what else you call it. In Idaho, we have very healthy elk deer numbers. Our coyotes range around 50,000 in the state. We've got about 30,000 black bears, 5,000 cougar, and the state says we have 1,500. I don't think there's any way that we have 1,500 wolves in the state. And I think right now we don't know how many wolves we have left after this many years of aggressive hunting of the population. So this is what Bob was talking about earlier, and I'm not sure it's the right graphic for him, but it is one that really shows that the before and after what's happened in the Yellowstone National Park ecosystem of when ungulates like elk and deer are left to just grow so high a number that they overbrowse, they destroy the habitat, and then it reduces the number of animals that can actually be there. So restoring wolves helps actually restore the whole ecosystem. They're a major part of our ecosystem. They've been here forever, and they were the missing link before they were reintroduced in the 1990s. The Wood River Wolf Project is an example of a non-lethal wolf project that's been working now for 15 years here in Idaho, and it's in one of the worst case scenarios. We have about 20,000 sheep in our project area, very heavily wooded, mountainous terrain, and we have wolves that have set up shop, that they're there year round. So when the sheep come in, we were able to work with the local ranchers to put these non-lethal tools on the ground and test them to see if they would work on a large landscape. And they do. We lose about 5 out of those 20,000 sheep on average annually to wolves. So it's one of the lowest loss rates anywhere. We do so by monitoring the wolves, knowing their patterns. When wolf population gets really disturbed, if wolves are killed, and especially, if packs break apart, then that affects the whole order of things. It introduces chaos, and it's at that point, it's much harder to manage for protecting livestock when you don't have a stable wolf behavior occurring within your packs. It really makes it worse overall. We also added livestock guardian dogs and helped the ranchers work with those, and helping them understand that there's some times of the year that livestock guardian dogs are actually an attractant. So when wolves are denning with their pups, they think of the wolves or the dogs as funny looking wolves. And so strange wolves are the biggest threat to their pups. So if you bring dogs in near the den site in April and May, this time of year, you may actually cause a conflict that you were trying to avoid. So just helping people think in the mind of the wolf, what are they looking at the world like? It's a little bit different from us. And we're teaching that with volunteer citizen scientists. They're learning how to track and monitor wolves themselves. They do a great job. Just hoping that we can maintain, especially in Blaine County, a healthy population of wolves there, because we have so much support within the county to protect wolves and to have both sides at the table. We know that these methods work across the landscape. They also work in cattle operations. They're different types of methods, but if you have the right tools in place, then you can really minimize the amount of livestock losses on the landscape to wolves. So that's just a small clip of what we do and trying to help. We're working with species around the world which are also suffering conflict because of they perceived either competition or threat to people's resources, and they don't understand how to work with nature really instead of against her. So with that, I think, Cindy, we're going to turn over for questions. And Allison, are you ready to start us off?
Yep, I'm here. So the first question that I have is for James. And Pamela asks, have you gained any traction with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service or Secretary Deb Haaland in hearing your tribal voice? Is James still here?
That's a good question. I think, am I not here? Oh, no. Hello?
Oh, you're here.
Okay, I'm here. All right. Yes. I don't think much traction has been made. I think they've went into government to government consultations. I think they've also, sought to separate tribes and how they communicate with them and make these different wolf populations separate issues. And so I think there's definitely a lot of consolidation and coordination that can take place between tribes across the country and with nonprofits such as ours, and to more holistically get the full court press on and hopefully get greater action. Thank you.
Thank you, James. All right, I have a question from Shane, and I think this is for Bob and Suzanne. But his question is, because wolves outside of Yellowstone and other protected areas cannot achieve a natural predator-prey balance, what is an ideal sustainable number in the Northern Rockies ecosystem? Also, since many game species are managed at a surplus because of hunting, how does this affect the management of wolves?
Do you want to start, Suzanne?
I was gonna say, you might want to tackle that first premise that somehow there's not a balance of predator and prey outside the park. Do you want to talk about that first?
Yeah, I mean, I've learned in my life to be careful not to make assumptions. And I think that's assumption that just, I don't see any grounds for it. And I think I tried to make that point that, it's been made, this point's been made many times. You have to think back over the tens of thousands of years and longer that all these systems and all these species lived in some kind of a balance, and we upset it. And so really, you know, we try to put the blame or the cause on, oh, it's this or that, or that, you know, there's a disease here, or things are out of balance because it's natural. Well, that's not true. And we just don't have information. So it's a great question, but we don't even know how many wolves we have. We don't use the best available science. We don't use the best available methods. So again, we're flying blind. So it's hard to even answer a question because the people that are responsible for gathering the data and making the decisions based on that evidence just aren't doing their job.
I think it might be helpful if Cindy, if any of you guys can find the scientist letter and then potentially the analysis or the petition and put the link from our website up there, because I think that has a lot of information in it as well. But it is, if wildlife is supposed to be managed for surplus, that's not what's happening with wolves. And we know that we have one of the highest numbers of elk in the state of Idaho since they started recording elk numbers over the last century. But the number of wolves is dropping dramatically, and that the state is insisting that it's remaining stable despite all the added pressures to it. It really boils down to poor counting methods. They're not reliable, and denial. You know, that there's a lot of people that in the state legislature, I mean, their point with Senate Bill 1211 was to kill 90% or potentially more of the population. What we're trying to say is, you know, wolves are in trouble, and we need the Fish and Wildlife Service to pull the reins back, Department of Interior, and stop this before we lose more wolves and before the metapopulation itself is destroyed. We need a healthy, functioning ecosystem. Wolves are a major part of that. Killing most of them or all of them on our watch is not acceptable. Seeing the eradication of wolves again this century, you know, I never thought I'd live to see the day that we'd see bounties on wolves. I mean, it just is shocking. So yeah, I hope we answered your question, but let's put those links in there. And then hopefully if you want more details, you can also email us. My email address, we'll throw that in there too. And we're happy to provide that for you.
Thank you, Suzanne and Bob. This question is for Nathan. Can you elaborate on the 82 million generated? Is it the states around Yellowstone? Hunters often argue they should have more say due to Pittman-Robertson grants. It is important to have data tell the story that non-consumptive users should have equal say.
Yeah, you bet. The number comes from an original study that was done in the Yellowstone area that tried to quantify the visitor impact in terms of economics on wolves. So how much were they spending in the Yellowstone area? And it's mostly our region and the gateway communities. So John Duffield from the University of Montana did the study originally in 2005 and came up with a figure around 35 million annually. This was based on a survey of like what vacation you wanted to do. If wolves were not in Yellowstone, would you have done a different one? And people that said yes, said, you know, that we were here for wolves. They quantified the expenses and the amount of money they put into the local economy. So I also hear a lot about consumptive users. There's fewer elk and that kind of thing. He tried to quantify a little bit of that too, and maybe thought that that was an insignificant loss just because people were still hunting, and there was quite a lot of that. We do hear that, you know, there used to be some heyday around the northern Yellowstone area when elk were overpopulated and pouring out. There was a winter hunt that residents could take part in. It's largely people hunting elk for food. And certainly we lost that, but you know, that was 25 years ago, and we've adapted to a new economy, and all the same hotels and restaurants and services like ours are now working year round, not just in the winter, but year round to show people wolves and grizzly bears and other wildlife species. The 82 million comes from just the updated study parameters that were no longer in 2005, and there's a heck of a lot more people visiting Yellowstone. Close to 5 million visitors come to the park. That's the true driver of our region, and wolves are just a major part of that. And the non-consumptive use of them allows so many more people to take part in it and spend money in our area because they're an attraction that just, while sustainable, keeps on giving back to us. So thanks for that question. It's a real good contrast between the consumptive and non-consumptive, and stay tuned for more economic information as we pay for studies to actually quantify this better in the current time.
Awesome. Thank you, Nathan. I think the next question is for Bob. How did the last big fire in Yellowstone in 1988 affect the gray wolves who were introduced in 94? Did the burned area pose a disadvantage as they established their territory, or was there advantages for wolves, i.e. the lack of trees an advantage for hunting the ungulates, or was the Yellowstone National Park landscape sufficiently recovered?
Oh, great question. Thanks for that. I made an argument early on in the EIS process and a study of the role of non-ungulate prey for wolves. And we know from National Park Service studies that I was involved in that the fire created a much larger number of small mammal prey. For example, ground squirrels that we typically see wolves prey on in the late summer. Normally when wolves in other areas are starving because they don't have access to ungulate neonates. So it's the small mammal prey base. And it was also kind of autocatalytic. So the fire also was related to regeneration of forage in the trees, which secondarily pulled the elk away into some of those areas off the floodplain, which we know the wolves did a really good job of too. So it really did add to the rebalancing of things and provided a much more diverse landscape that did directly and indirectly benefit wolves. There's just a few examples there.
Awesome. Thank you, Bob. All right. I have a question for Suzanne. At the Wolf fundraiser in Fort Collins, you said that Colorado has a historic opportunity to do it right with wolf reintroduction commencing in late 2023. Marlon Rice, the first gentleman, was the opening speaker and emphasizes both protection of wolves and wild horses. What is the guidance for us in Colorado?
Colorado, has so much support for wolves in the state, and is such an important state for wolves because of the fact that you could take all the wolves in the Northern Rockies and put them in Colorado, and it can still sustain far more than that. I mean, Colorado's habitat is probably the best in the Western United States for wolves. The biggest thing that I think needs to be done there is getting ahead of the conflicts so that we are already proactively addressing those, knowing where they're going to occur, how to get people on the ground working together to do things like carcass management. It's a really basic tool of non-lethal, is to stop, reduce the attractants, because that often in every state has been what has drawn wolves into areas where there were livestock because they were chasing down the dead livestock. And wolves have an incredible sense of smell. Their smelling cells, and we have in our brain about the size of a pea to interpret scent, but in their brain it's like the size of your fist. So it's amazing, how they see and experience the world, very different from us. And knowing those differences can help ranchers on the ground to avoid having livestock losses to wolves, and finding ways to coexist in a more peaceful manner. There will be some losses on both sides, but if we know those in advance and know how to proactively plan for the best scenarios rather than waiting for a train wreck, that's the most that we can hope for. And Gabrielle, I have heard you on the wild horse issue as well. I know that that issue is also near and dear to your heart and to many people across the country, and the similarities between what's happening to wolves and wild horses cannot be ignored. It's certainly a competition for the land, and a perceived sense that some people and their livestock should be there and others species don't matter. And we really need to change that narrative. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. All right, I have one for Tallassy now. Was it Tester's rider in 2011 in the bill to prevent the government from shutting down that allowed the wolves of the Northern Rockies to be excluded from the ESA? How do wolf advocate attorneys fight to reverse this rider? And how is it legal to basically say that it can't be overturned? What else can we do to fight this?
So what Tester's rider did is it directed the Fish and Wildlife Service to reissue the 2009 rule that it had that delisted wolves in the Northern Rockies, and it immunized that rule from that new decision from judicial review. But Tester's rider did not preclude listing wolves in the Northern Rockies if new information showed that they were imperiled and met the definition of an endangered or threatened species under the Endangered Species Act. So essentially, with our listing petition that we sent last summer, that's what we asked them to do. We asked the Fish and Wildlife Service to relist wolves in the Northern Rockies. So while because of the rider and the listing rule, wolves are treated differently in the Northern Rockies than in the rest of the lower 48, or most of the rest of the lower 48 anyway. The listing rule didn't really affect the outcome of the recent, or the rider, I mean, didn't affect the outcome of the recent litigation over wolves in the rest of the lower 48, if that made any sense.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. All right.
Allison, can I quickly add something to that too?
Yeah.
I'd like to just read from the 2009 rule. In the Fish and Wildlife Service, in the rule, pledged that if a state changed their regulatory framework to authorize unlimited and unregulated taking of wolves, a condition that we have previously determined threatened a wolf population, emergency listing would be immediately pursued. In Idaho in 2001, they changed their state law to allow for unlimited and unregulated killing. The service had an obligation to step in. It has not done so. And I think that not only hurts the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Department of Interior's credibility, but it certainly will impact their ability to delist other species if they do not uphold the rule as it was written. And I speak very specifically of grizzly bear. Why would we trust the state of Idaho to manage grizzly or Montana if they don't uphold their agreements, which Idaho certainly has failed to do? Thanks.
Thank you, Suzanne. All right, I have a question for Michelle. Someone in the chat is asking how other students can get involved.
Yeah, I don't know, it's an interesting question. I think learning about the situation first is a huge thing, because without that, you'll get asked questions and you won't really know what to do. So I think that's the first part. Another one is trying to contact an organization that can help you, like the International Wildlife Coexistence Network has been really instrumental in helping my high school's environmental club do things like, for example, this panel discussion, or we're looking to produce some videos, but things like that. Being able to contact those organizations, and you can always start, your own protests or anything like that, petitions, if that's something you want to do. Yeah.
Thank you. All right. I have a question for James. How numerous were wolves in the Nez Perce territory before colonization? Do you know what their range was? Is there a correlation between wolves and the rivers where the Nez Perce have fished or hunted?
All right. You know, that those kind of pre-contact numbers are pretty hard to distinguish. They were numerous. They were all over. You know, we used them as a spiritual guide. One of our major warriors for the Nez Perce War was a young man by the name of Yellow Wolf. You know, and he had great strength and a lot of patience and cunning. But as far as numbers go, back to that question, I don't know. I'm sorry. They were plentiful. They were all over, and we definitely lived along with them.
Thank you. All right, we have a question probably for Tallassy, Bob, or Suzanne, and that is, can you please talk about any policies you support to build on the ESA? For example, 30 by 30, RAWA, etc., or RWA, or AWA, etc. How can the public support changes in policies on a state and federal level and go beyond asking for ESA relisting?
Sure, yeah, I think that's more of a Suzanne question, actually. But you know, my organization and others have talked about or worked on a Carnivore Protection Act. I think it's a Bison and Grizzly Protection Act in its current iteration. And that's something that we all can support. It's a proactive effort to support carnivore protection that does go beyond the ESA. And those are the kinds of solutions that we need. There's also state-based solutions that could be pursued in states that aren't Idaho, Montana, or Wyoming, that could also support carnivores and carnivore recovery. I'll let Suzanne elaborate.
Yeah, so I'm noticing in the chat, we've got people helping out with some of the answers and stuff too. So thank you guys. You know, the recovery level was set low to begin with, right? I mean, I think that's what got us into this mess initially. And the Fish and Wildlife Service has been reluctant and was reluctant to even have wolves in the region. It took, you know, the administration, and that was the Clinton administration, of just saying, we're going to do this. So if we want to change the outcome for wolves, we've got to think bigger picture, because the states clearly cannot manage them on their own. And as Tallassy just said, that one of the things we're working on is a Bison Grizzly Wolf Act that would provide long-term protections for these iconic species that need to have broader range across the states, and that are often persecuted by state legislatures that don't understand or want to understand these species and don't value them. So there's a lot coming, but right now I think the biggest opportunity we have, there's a national call-in tomorrow, and if we can put that information for the website so that everyone, you know, make your phone calls tomorrow to Secretary Holland, to President Biden, and let's get our howls going, because we don't have any choice here. We are the voice for these wolves, and in Idaho right now we have pups and dens, and it's just horrific to think that people are killing them so they can turn them in for bounty, when, you know, we need these wolves. We need them for so many different reasons, but we want a healthy, and we were promised a healthy metapopulation of wolves, and that's not what we're seeing today.
I have another question for Michelle. So you have such a unique voice being a student. Do you feel like you and other students have been able to influence parents and other adults in your community?
I would say so. A huge problem in Idaho is that there just aren't many people that know about the situation that's going on. And so, you know, all the efforts that we've had have definitely spread the message. And I think it's at least made parents and our communities more aware of the situation. At least they're thinking about it. Whether or not we've convinced people that were like anti-wolf to become pro-wolf, I'm not really sure about. But yeah, I think it's a matter of just raising awareness.
Thank you. All right.
One of the things that I know Michelle and the team from the high school are going to be doing is there's a Idaho Fish and Game Commission hearing on public hearing on the 18th of May. So if you're in Idaho, go to the Idaho Fish and Game website, go to the commission meeting schedule. We can probably put that in a link. I'll look for it after I get off here and send that to you as well. Please plan to show up and testify. It's in McCall, Idaho this time. And we're hoping that these students' voices will be heard. They're going to be talking about how to manage wolf killing funds, control board funds, and their bounty program. And I think they need all of us to be pushing back on this. And you know, enough is enough.
All right. What is the most impactful action we can take in order to get all wolves permanently listed in the Endangered Species Act? It's a tough one.
I mean, you know, I feel like it's really tough. The thing is that what we know about the Endangered Species Act is it's designed to help species recover. So if in an ideal world, no species would ever have to be permanently listed under the Endangered Species Act, right? You know, right now, I think that wolves need protection under the Endangered Species Act. The states are abusing their management authority and they're not doing what it will take to preserve the species. So the thing that you can do now is you can call your elected officials, you can take part in the action tomorrow, you can write letters, you can submit information to the status review, you can do all those things, and all of those things will help to list the species right now. But as far as like a more long-term solution, I think also supporting legislation like the Bison Grizzly Wolf Protection Act and other proactive solutions like that is something that we can do to ensure durable protections for these species.
Thank you. All right. Bob, can you talk about wolf-coyote relationships both on a continental scale and GYE?
Yes. I mean, first off, they're amazingly similar species. But what we suggest for management solutions for coyotes and wolves, vary a little bit, but not a lot. They're highly social species. So what we've learned in Yellowstone over a lot of long-term studies by a bunch of different researchers, in addition to myself, is that, again, things were out of balance because of the lack of wolves. I mean, look at the eastern United States, where we keep scratching our heads on how to manage white-tailed deer. And we all know that we need a predator, a large canid that's effective in naturally controlling and managing the white-tailed deer population out east. The same is true in the west. We've just so converted the landscape and taken away their habitat. At the same time, we're decimating both coyotes and wolves and killing them at large numbers every year. You know, we don't use natural ecosystem services. I like to say that nothing succeeds like succession and nothing disperses like a canid. If we just give them a chance, they'll do so much for us, just like the hybrid swarm of canids, dogs and wolves and coyotes in the east that are creating this larger canid that is preying upon white-tailed deer. So the same goes out west. And we know that with the reintroduction of wolves, we had lower, more natural levels of coyote populations. And things, based on the historic record, we saw that wolves were more commonly seen at the turn of the century, around 1900 in the park, than coyotes. And now it's returning to that. So again, we just need to bring back the original players and let nature take its course. And we'll have so many solutions that are naturally provided for us. But yeah, I mean, wolves had a big impact on coyotes, which had nothing but positive effects on the ecosystem, every one of them.
Thank you, Bob. Yes, and there's a question on the side about it being recorded. The recording will be out tomorrow morning, in case you missed anything.
Thank you. Well, we wanted to thank everybody for joining us. I wanted to thank our tremendous team, Cindy Hoffman, our communications director, and Allison Miller, our communications manager, and all the other people who worked on getting this pulled together, our panelists for doing this yet again. I love bringing this band together because there's a lot of synergy here between all of these people from different perspectives, but all of us share that great concern. We don't want to see wolves extirpated from the Northern Rockies in our lifetime. We want to see them valued and as an important part of our ecosystems, and that they be treated, managed, like Idaho promised, that we would manage them like we do our mountain lions, black bears, and others. They're not even doing that. This is eradication and not hunting that's going on, and we need to raise our voices to stop it. So thank you so much, everyone, and we really appreciate you being with us. Feel free to write to us if you have other questions. But with that, James, Bob, Nathan, Michelle, Tallassy, it was a real honor to be here with you tonight, and look forward to our next forum.